My son threw my life's possessions in the trash, and his wife just mocked me. "You're not needed anymore, just go." I stood there in the middle of my broken memories. I smiled and made a call. 3 days later, they were frantically looking for me, leaving 76 missed calls. They thought they had erased me, but they were wrong. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The first thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the pile. My pickup truck groaned to a stop in front of what used to feel like home. And there it was, a mountain of belongings scattered next to the dumpster like yesterday's waste. Cardboard boxes ripped open, the contents spilling onto the pavement in a chaos I couldn't quite process. Those are my things. The thought hit me even before I turned off the engine. My hands stayed clamped to the steering wheel, knuckles white against the worn leather. 3 days of fishing on the lake had left me tired but at peace. That peace evaporated like morning mist. I climbed out slowly, my joints protesting after the long drive. The cool May evening carried the smell of rain and something else. The damp odor of clothes that had been outside too long. My work boots crunched on the gravel as I approached the pile, each step feeling heavier than the last. There, half buried under a tangle of winter coats, was the picture. Our wedding photo from 42 years ago. The glass was cracked diagonally across Eleanor's face, her smile split by a jagged line. Mud clung to the silver frame I had polished just last month. Someone made a mistake. This has to be a mistake. But the evidence kept piling up. My anniversary watch, the one Eleanor had saved up for 3 months to buy me. It lay face down in a puddle, the crystal shattered. The leather strap was soaked, probably ruined. I picked it up with trembling fingers, the water dripping through my knuckles. My fishing gear was scattered everywhere. Tackle boxes were busted open. Lures and sinkers mixed with kitchen utensils and old photographs. The rod I'd used for 20 years lay snapped in half, its guides torn off like broken teeth. Someone had tossed my entire life into the street, with all the care they'd give to actual garbage. The boxes told their own story, hastily packed, handled roughly, torn at the corners where they'd been dragged or dropped. My name was still visible on one side, written in Eleanor's careful script from our last move. The ink had bled in the humid air, making my own name look like a watercolor mistake. I found my work shirts in a heap, the ones I'd worn at the factory for 30 years, oil stains and all. They had been mine. Now they lay wrinkled and dirty, trampled by whoever had hauled them out here. My good boots, the pair I saved for special occasions. They were upside down with caked mud on the soles. What the heck happened here? The question burned in my chest as I stood surrounded by the wreckage of my life. The neighbors' windows remained dark despite the commotion. Nobody came out to explain or help. The whole street felt hollow, like everyone was holding their breath and waiting for me to disappear. My phone vibrated against my hip. For a moment, hope surged. Maybe Robert calling to explain. Maybe someone from the city saying they'd made a mistake. But it was just a text from the bait shop, confirming my receipt from this morning, the normal world continuing while mine fell apart. I knelt and lifted Eleanor's jewelry box, its wooden surface scratched and one corner dented. The velvet lining had come loose, and her few precious pieces were scattered in the dirt. Her mother's ring, the one I had planned to pass down to Robert's future daughter, was now covered in grime, lying next to a bottle cap and cigarette butts. The reality settled over me like a cold fog. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had deliberately packed up everything I owned and dumped it like trash. Someone had made a decision to destroy 40 years of careful preservation, 40 years of memories, 40 years of building a life. I straightened up, my back aching from bending over the scattered belongings. The house loomed in front of me, its windows dark and unwelcoming. I needed answers. I needed to understand why my entire existence was now decorating the street like a yard sale gone wrong. Time to find out what's really going on here. I walked up to the front door, stepping over more scattered papers and broken picture frames. Every step felt deliberate now, purposeful. Someone was going to explain this mess, and they were going to explain it right now. The key slid into the lock, turned halfway, and then stopped dead. I tried again, applying more pressure, wiggling the metal back and forth like I had 1,000 times before. Nothing. The lock refused to budge, as solid and unyielding as if I'd been trying to open a bank vault with a butter knife. They changed the locks. They actually changed the locks on my own house. My hands were shaking now, making it hard to manage the key. I pulled it out and examined it closely, as if the brass could have somehow transformed during my fishing trip. Same worn edges, same scratches I'd memorized over the years. The lock was different, not the key. I fumbled for my phone, scrolling through the contacts with clumsy fingers. Robert first. He would explain this mess. He would fix everything. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before switching to voicemail, his cheerful, recorded voice. "You've reached Robert. Leave a message and I'll call you back." "Robert, it's Dad. I just got back from fishing and all my things are in the street. They changed the locks. What is going on? Call me back right away." I tried Mary next. Though talking to my daughter-in-law always felt like walking through a minefield. Same result, straight to voicemail. Her message was shorter, snappier. "You know what to do." Standing there on my own front porch, locked out like a stranger, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't a mix-up or an emergency repair. Someone had planned this. Someone had waited until I was out of town, and then systematically erased me from the place I had called home for 15 years. The evening shadows were lengthening, and the spring air carried a chill that hadn't been there an hour earlier. I walked across the lawn to George's house, my neighbour for 8 years. If anyone knew what had happened, he would. The man noticed everything. What newspapers people read, when they left for work, who visited them and when. I knocked on his door, 3 sharp taps that echoed down the quiet street. Footsteps approached, cautious and measured. The door opened just enough for George's weathered face to appear, his eyes darting past me to my scattered belongings. "George, do you know what happened here? All my stuff is in the street and I can't get into my house." His expression shifted, uncomfortable and evasive. "Sorry, Arthur. I haven't noticed anything unusual. Maybe some kind of mistake." "Mistake?" I gestured toward the pile of my possessions. "That's 40 years of my life next to the garbage. Someone changed my locks while I was fishing. You had to have seen something." George's gaze drifted away, focusing on something behind my shoulder. "I've been busy with my yard. Didn't really pay attention to what was going on over there." The lie hung between us like smoke. George had been retired for 6 years and spent most days positioned at his front window, watching the neighborhood like a security guard. He knew exactly what had happened, but he wasn't going to tell me. "Look, if you need a place to make phone calls or wait for your family, you're welcome to—" "Thanks, but I'll manage." He seized on it quickly, clearly relieved. "Well, I hope you get it sorted out." The door clicked shut softly, leaving me alone on his porch. Even George, who'd borrowed my tools and shared beers on summer evenings, was turning his back on me. Whatever had happened here, the whole neighborhood was either in on it or too scared to get involved. I walked back to my belongings, each step heavier than the last. The pile looked even more pathetic under the dying light, like the remains of someone's entire existence spilled out for the world to see. I found an old patio chair among the wreckage, aluminum frame bent but still functional, and set it up next to the largest box. My phone showed no new messages. I tried calling Robert again, then Mary. Both calls went straight to voicemail without even ringing this time. Either their phones were off, or they were deliberately avoiding me. Given the evidence surrounding me, I bet on the latter. The street grew quieter as dinner time approached. Other houses showed signs of life, lights flicking on, garage doors lifting as people returned from work. But nobody paused to ask if I needed help, or to wonder why an old man was sitting among garbage bags full of possessions. Everyone seemed to know something I didn't. I settled deeper into the chair, pulling my jacket tighter against the cooling air. Whatever game was being played here, I was apparently the only one who didn't know the rules. But I had learned patience in 65 years of life, and stubbornness in 30 years of factory work. I could wait. They would have to come home eventually, and when they did, I would get my answers. The sky was beginning to turn purple at the edges, and the streetlights were starting to flicker on one by one. I checked my phone again. Still nothing, but I wasn't going anywhere. Not until someone explained why my whole life had been discarded like yesterday's trash. I didn't have anywhere else to go anyway. 4 hours passed like a slow bleed. I had gone through most of my belongings by the time their car pulled into the driveway. Some things were salvageable, clothes that could be washed, books that were only dampened. Other items were ruined beyond repair, victims of their hasty eviction. The anniversary watch was definitely lost, its face clouded with moisture and the hands frozen at 2:07. Their car headlights swept the pile as Mary parked, illuminating the chaos like a crime scene. I rose from the patio chair, my joints screaming after hours of sitting in the cool air. Relief washed over me in spite of everything. Finally, someone who could explain this nightmare. Robert got out of the passenger side. His movements careful and deliberate. He looked older than his 42 years. Shoulders slumped under a weight I couldn't identify. Mary stepped out of the driver's side with her usual brisk efficiency, her blonde hair perfect despite the long day. Robert, Mary, thank goodness you're here. I walked toward them, gesturing at the scattered belongings. What happened? Why are my things in the street? I can't get into the house. Someone changed the locks while I was fishing. Mary didn't break stride, walking past me as if I were invisible. She pulled grocery bags from the trunk with sharp, angry movements. When she finally looked at me, her expression was cold enough to freeze water. Because you're not needed here anymore, Arthur. The words hit me a physical blow. I actually took a step back, blinking in confusion. What do you mean, not needed? This is my home. I live here. Lived, she corrected, slamming the trunk shut. Past tense. The mortgage is paid off now. Your job here is done. Take your garbage and leave. My job? The phrase made no sense. Mary, I don't understand what you're talking about. This is my house. I've been paying the mortgage for… Exactly. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. You paid it. Mission accomplished. We don't need you anymore. I turned to Robert, desperate for sanity in this madness. Son, what is she talking about? Tell me what's going on here. Robert couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the ground, hands shoved deep in his pockets, like a guilty kid. I'm sorry, Dad, he mumbled, barely audible. We tried to make it work, but… But what? I reached out for him, and he actually flinched away from my touch. Robert, look at me. I'm your father. I've lived in this house for 15 years. I pay for the groceries, the utilities, the repairs. This is my home. Mary let out a sound like breaking pottery. Your home? You were a tenant, Arthur, a very useful tenant, who paid all our bills and asked for nothing in return. But tenants can be evicted when they are no longer convenient. The cruelty of it stole my breath. I looked between them, my son avoiding my gaze, my daughter-in-law smiling with obvious satisfaction, the streetlight casting harsh shadows on their faces, making them look like strangers. "I helped you buy this house," I said slowly, each word carefully measured. "When you didn't qualify for the mortgage, I co-signed. When you couldn't make the payments, I covered them. When you needed a down payment for Robert's car, I gave you my savings, everything I had." "You gave it to this family, and we are grateful," Mary said with false sincerity. "Truly we are. But gratitude doesn't mean we have to house you forever. You're old, Arthur. You take up space, you track mud into my clean house, you leave dishes in the sink, and you watch the television too loud. We want our lives back." Robert shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My own son, standing there while his wife dismantled our relationship with surgical precision. The boy I had taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, supported through college, reduced to a silent accomplice in my exile. Where am I supposed to go? The question came out smaller than I intended, tinged with a vulnerability that made me hate myself. That is no longer our problem. Mary turned toward the front door, grocery bags in hand. "You're a grown man. Figure it out." "Robert." I tried one last time, putting every ounce of fatherly authority into his name. "Look at me, son." He lifted his eyes for just a moment, and what I saw there was worse than hatred. It was nothing. Complete indifference. Empty. As if I were already dead to him. "The locks are changed," Mary yelled over her shoulder. "Don't try to get in. I'll call the cops if I have to." The front door opened and slammed shut, leaving me alone under the streetlight with my scattered possessions. The porch light flickered on, and then immediately off. A clear message that I wasn't welcome even near the entrance. I stood there for a long moment, processing what had just happened. 42 years of fatherhood, erased. 15 years of generosity, forgotten. A lifetime of love and sacrifice, discarded like an inconvenient bill. But beneath the pain, something else was growing, something harder and colder than the night air. They thought they could use me and throw me away like trash. They thought they could steal everything I had worked for and then lock me out of my own life. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The door closed with a definitive click that resonated in my bones. I stood there, frozen on the sidewalk, looking at the house that had been my home for 15 years. The porch light darkened again, leaving me in the amber glow of the streetlight. 8 years. 8 years since that conversation in the kitchen, when Robert had looked me in the eye and promised we would always be family. His voice came back to me, younger and full of hope. "Dad, if you help us with the mortgage, we'll always be together. This is our family home now." I could see him so clearly in my memory, leaning against the counter with that earnest expression he'd inherited from his mother. Mary had been there too, her hair shorter then, her smile warmer, or maybe it just looked warmer because I had wanted to believe it. "You will always have a home with us, Mr. Arthur," she had said, using my formal name as she always did back then. "We want you to feel like this is your place too." How naive I had been. How desperate to believe my son still needed me, still wanted me close. Eleanor had been gone for 2 years by then, and the house felt too empty, too quiet. When Robert called about their mortgage trouble, I jumped at the chance to help, not just with money, but with belonging somewhere again. "Family takes care of family," I had told them, signing the papers that made me responsible for their debt. "Of course I'll help." Robert had hugged me that day, actually hugged me, something he hadn't done since his teenage years. "I promise you, Dad, you won't ever regret this. You won't ever regret this." The words tasted bitter now. I thought about the gradual shifts, how the first few years had been good, family dinners, holiday celebrations. Robert asking my advice on work problems. I had felt useful, needed. But sometime around 2020, things started to change. Dinner invitations became less frequent. Conversations grew shorter. My opinions were dismissed more quickly. By 2023, I ate most meals alone in my room. Mary would sigh when I used the kitchen, as if my presence was an inconvenience she barely tolerated. Robert stopped asking for advice and started looking through me instead of at me. They had developed a language of subtle glances and signals that excluded me completely, but I had told myself it was temporary stress. Robert's job, Mary's moods, the usual ups and downs of family life. I had made excuses for them the way parents do, finding reasons to justify behavior that grew colder and more dismissive. The pattern was clear now. Seen from this side of the betrayal, the closer we got to paying off the mortgage, the worse they treated me, as if my usefulness had an expiration date tied directly to the loan balance. Every payment I made toward their debt was one step closer to my eviction. They had been planning this, maybe not from the start, but certainly for months. You don't change the locks on impulse. You don't pack up someone's entire life in boxes without premeditation. This had been calculated, methodical, timed perfectly for my fishing trip. 8 years of mortgage payments. 8 years of buying groceries, paying utilities, covering repairs. 8 years of believing I was investing in family when I was actually funding my own elimination. The street was silent, except for the distant hum of freeway traffic. Other houses showed signs of normal family life, television screens flickering behind curtains, porch lights welcoming people home. But nobody came out to check on the old man standing among garbage bags full of belongings. Even in the suburbs, people minded their own business when it came to family drama. I pulled my jacket tighter against the night chill. Staying here feeling sorry for myself wouldn't change anything. Robert had made his choice. And it wasn't me. Mary had won whatever game she had been playing all these years. They had gotten what they wanted, a paid-off house and freedom from the inconvenience of gratitude. But they had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed I was powerless, that an old man with nowhere to go would simply vanish quietly into whatever assistance programs existed for discarded parents. They had treated me as if I were already dead, just a burden waiting to be buried. Time to show them how wrong they were. I turned and walked back toward my scattered belongings. My steps were firm and purposeful. The pile looked different now. Not like trash, but like evidence. I approached my scattered possessions with a mechanic's eye, assessing what could be saved and what deserved to be left behind. 40 years of factory work had taught me to think systematically, to solve problems by careful analysis rather than emotional reaction. This was just another problem that required a practical solution. The wedding photo was the first thing that went into the cab of my truck. Broken glass and all, some things were worth preserving, regardless of the damage. Eleanor's jewelry box followed, along with the few pieces of her mother's costume jewelry that had survived Mary's rushed packing. They weren't valuable to anyone else, but they were priceless to me. My work tools were scattered among the clothes and household items. The socket wrench set I'd owned for 30 years, still in perfect condition. The level that had helped me build Robert's treehouse when he was 8. These tools had value beyond sentimentality. They represented skills and capabilities that Robert and Mary had forgotten I possessed. I loaded them carefully onto the truck bed, each wrench and screwdriver finding its proper place in the toolbox. Organization mattered. Preparation mattered. If I was going to rebuild my life from scratch at 65, I would need every advantage I could muster. The clothing was a mixed blessing. Most of my work shirts had survived intact, along with several pairs of jeans and my winter coat. The formal wear was ruined. The suit I had worn for Eleanor's funeral was stained and wrinkled beyond recovery, but I wouldn't be needing formal wear for what came next. A car slowed as it passed, the driver craning his neck to look at the old man loading garbage into a pickup truck. I held his gaze steadily until he looked away and drove on. Let them look. Let the whole neighborhood see what Robert and Mary had done. Shame was a tool that cut both ways. My fishing gear had taken a beating, but most of it was salvageable. The broken rod could be replaced, and the tackle boxes just needed reorganizing. Fishing had always been my escape, my time to think clearly without interference. I would need that clarity in the coming weeks. Papers and documents were scattered like leaves after a storm. I gathered them methodically. Insurance policies, bank statements, tax returns, important information that Robert and Mary had tossed as carelessly as everything else. Did they think I existed only within the walls of their house? Did they imagine I had no financial life beyond paying their bills? That was their second critical mistake. They knew I had savings. They had watched me write checks for their expenses year after year, but they had never bothered to know the full extent of my resources. To them, I was just a convenient source of monthly payments. Not a man who had worked steadily for 40 years and lived beneath his means. The anniversary watch was beyond repair. Its crystal shattered and the movement flooded. I held it for a moment, remembering the pride in Eleanor's face when she had presented it to me wrapped in newspaper, because we couldn't afford fancy gift wrap back then. Then I dropped it into one of the damaged boxes I was leaving behind. Some symbols of the past needed to stay buried. George's house remained dark, although I could see the faint glow of a television through his living room curtains, probably watching me through a gap in the blinds, cataloguing details he could share with other neighbors tomorrow. The whole street would know about Robert's ingratitude by morning, even if none of them would intervene. Suburban courtesy had its limits. 43 years I had worked to support this family. First Eleanor and baby Robert, when money was tight and factory jobs were uncertain. Then Robert alone through his teens, college tuition, and early career struggles. Finally, Robert and Mary, helping them achieve the middle-class stability I had never quite managed for myself. Time for a return on that investment. The truck bed was nearly full now, packed with everything that mattered. I would have to leave some furniture behind, the dresser Eleanor had refinished, the recliner where I watched television most nights. But material possessions were only dead weight now. I needed mobility, flexibility, freedom to act without encumbrance. I took one last look at the debris field that had been my life 2 hours ago. Amazing how quickly 40 years could be reduced to what fit in a pickup truck. But reduction also meant distillation, keeping only what was essential, valuable, meaningful. Robert and Mary thought they had won by discarding me. They thought that getting me out of their house would get me out of their lives. They had underestimated the difference between getting rid of someone and truly getting rid of someone. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine caught short right away. Reliable machinery responding to experienced hands. In the rearview mirror, I could see the house getting smaller as I drove away, its windows dark and unwelcoming. But I wasn't disappearing into the night as they expected. I was just shifting position, moving to higher ground, where I could see the whole battlefield clearly. Time to show them what 43 years of experience looked like when it stopped being grateful. The cheap motel's neon sign flickered red against the darkness as I pulled into the parking lot. The place looked exactly like what it was. A roadside motel for travelers who needed basic, no-frills shelter. 2 stories of identical doors. Ice machines humming at each end. and the lingering smell of freeway exhaust mixed with industrial cleaner, perfect for someone who needed to temporarily disappear while plotting their next move. The clerk was a tired-eyed college kid of maybe 25, with the practiced indifference of someone working the night shift. He barely looked up from his magazine as I approached the counter. "How many nights?" he asked, sliding a registration form across the laminated surface. "Just one for now," I answered, signing my name carefully. "We'll see how it goes from there." Room 127 was exactly what I had expected. A full-sized bed with a floral comforter that had seen better decades, a small table by the window, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. The carpet showed traffic patterns from thousands of previous guests, and the heater rattled when it kicked on. But it was clean, it was private, and it cost $50 a night. I'd stayed in worse places during my factory years. I carried my boxes inside one by one, my back protesting after the long day. The truck could stay loaded with everything else. No point in unpacking what I would have to pack again. But I needed the essentials. Clothes for tomorrow, Eleanor's jewelry box, and the folder of important papers I'd salvaged from the debris. The fluorescent light of the bathroom was harsh after the warm glow of the streetlights. In the mirror, I looked older than I had felt this morning. The day had carved new lines around my eyes, added weight to my shoulders. But my hands were steady, my mind clear. That was what mattered now. I placed Eleanor's jewelry box and our wedding photo on the nightstand, creating a small sanctuary of memory in this temporary space. The broken glass split her smile in half, but her eyes hadn't changed. Bright, with the optimism that had carried us through 38 years of marriage. She had known how to love unconditionally, how to build rather than destroy. "I should have done this years ago," I told her photo quietly. "Should have seen what they were doing before it got this far." But regret was a luxury I couldn't afford. Eleanor had died believing Robert was a good man who would look after his aging father. I wouldn't dishonor her memory by letting her faith prove unfounded. The motel bed was firm but narrow, nothing like the big mattress I'd slept on for the past 8 years. The noise of the freeway filtered through the thin walls, trucks gearing down, cars speeding toward distant destinations. Other guests moving through their own temporary existences, carrying their own problems from one place to another. I stayed awake most of the night, not from discomfort, but from mental activity. My mind was processing 8 years of gradual manipulation, cataloguing moments I had misinterpreted or ignored. How many times had Mary made subtle comments about my age, my habits, my inconvenience? How often had Robert sided with her against me without saying anything directly? The pattern was unmistakable once I stopped making excuses for them. Every kindness I had shown had been treated as an obligation. Every sacrifice had been accepted as my natural duty. They had trained me to be grateful for less and less, until I was grateful just to exist in their space. But they had made one fundamental miscalculation. They had assumed that dependence ran only one way, that I needed them more than they needed me. They had forgotten that 8 years of mortgage payments created legal relationships beyond family sentiment. They had overlooked the papers they had signed when I helped them qualify for the loan. By 6 o'clock in the morning, I was fully dressed and ready for action. The shower had been lukewarm at best, and the coffee from the lobby machine tasted like it had been brewed sometime last week. But the discomfort was temporary. What mattered was the momentum. Moving forward with purpose instead of wallowing in self-pity. I loaded my remaining belongings back into the truck and checked out at the front desk. The same clerk was still there, looking even wearier after his all-night shift. "Everything okay?" he asked automatically. "Better than expected," I replied, meaning it. The morning air was crisp and full of possibility. I had money in the bank, skills that were still valuable, and legal options Robert and Mary didn't know existed. Most importantly, I had the advantage of being underestimated by people who thought they understood me completely. Time to educate them about their mistake. I started the truck and pulled out onto the freeway, heading back toward the city with the same sense of purpose I had felt 40 years before, when I had started my first real job. There was work to do, problems to solve, and justice to serve. Robert and Mary had wanted me out of their lives. They were about to find out that sometimes you get exactly what you ask for. The phone book felt thin in my hands as I looked up attorneys who worked weekends. Richard Cruz's advertisement stood out. Real estate and immigration law. Emergency consultations available. His office number connected me to a tired but professional voice that suggested Saturday morning appointments were possible for urgent matters. Mr. Cruz, I urgently need to clarify home ownership matters. There's been a family dispute over a house I've been living in, and I need to understand my legal position. You can bring the relevant documents, mortgage papers, deed, anything that shows your involvement in the property. I spread the papers I had salvaged from the wreckage across the motel bed. Everything was there. Loan documents, property tax receipts, insurance policies, 40 years of factory work had taught me to keep records, even when other people handled the details. The drive downtown took 20 minutes through the quiet Saturday morning streets. The city looked different from this perspective, less like the town where my son had betrayed me, more like a place where business was conducted, regardless of family drama. Professional buildings ready to solve problems for people willing to pay consultation fees. Cruz's office occupied the third floor of a converted brick building near the courthouse. The waiting room was small but clean, decorated with certificates and photographs of successful clients. I was the only person there, gripping a manila folder that might contain my future. Richard Cruz turned out to be a compact man in his mid-40s, dressed in weekend casual clothes, but maintaining a professional demeanor. He motioned me into his office and accepted the folder with careful attention to detail. Tell me about the situation first, then we'll go through the documents. I explained the basics without emotional embellishment. 8 years of mortgage payments, gradual breakdown of family relations, sudden eviction and lock changes. Cruz nodded occasionally, taking notes on a legal pad. Now let's see what the papers tell us. He spread the documents across his desk, systematically examining each page with the methodical attention I recognized from my own work habits. When he got to the original deed and mortgage agreement, his eyebrows lifted slightly. Mr. Arthur, according to these documents, you are the sole owner of the property in question. The words hung in the air like smoke from a welding torch. What about the mortgage? I asked. Robert and Mary live there. They said I was helping them buy their house. The mortgage was issued only in your name. You qualified for the loan. You have made all the payments, and the property tax records show you as the official owner. Your son and daughter-in-law have no legal claim to the house at all. Cruz turned the deed toward me, pointing out the relevant sections. My name appeared in all the critical places: borrower, owner, responsible party. Robert and Mary were nowhere to be found in the legal language that actually mattered. But they live there. They've been treating it as their home for 8 years. Living in a property does not establish ownership. At best, they could be considered tenants, although I see no formal lease agreement. Legally, you have every right to reclaim your property and evict any unauthorized occupants. The satisfaction started in my chest and spread outward like the warmth of a good meal. 8 years of being treated like a burden. 8 years of having my generosity thrown back at me. 8 years of watching my son choose his wife over his father. And all the while, they had been living in my house, eating food I bought, using utilities I paid for, in a home they had no legal right to occupy. What are my options? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rising emotion. You could demand they vacate immediately. You could begin formal eviction proceedings. You could sell the property and force them to move. As the legal owner, you have considerable leverage in this situation. Cruz reviewed the documents one more time, checking details with professional thoroughness. The mortgage has been fully paid off as of last month. You own the property free and clear, valued at approximately $400,000 in the current market. $400,000? I had been living like a charity case in my own $400,000 house. Grateful for the privilege of paying other people's bills, the irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. I need copies of everything that establishes my ownership, and I'll need recommendations for a good real estate agent. Cruz efficiently prepared the copies while explaining the legal protections of home ownership. In an hour, I had documentation that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Robert and Mary had been living rent-free in my house for 8 years. The spring morning felt different as I walked back to my truck. Warmer, brighter, filled with possibilities that hadn't existed an hour before. I wasn't a homeless old man begging for shelter. I was a property owner who had been temporarily inconvenienced by squatters. Time to reclaim what was mine and show them the difference between charity and ownership. Morales Realty's parking lot was empty except for one car when I arrived that afternoon. Regina Morales turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s who apparently worked weekends for clients serious about buying or selling. Her handshake was firm, her smile professional, and her questions direct. "Mr. Arthur, what kind of timeline are we looking at for the sale of your property?" "As quickly as possible. I need the house listed immediately and shown to serious buyers starting Monday." She pulled up the property records on her computer, nodding as the details filled the screen. "This is a good neighborhood, 4-bedroom house. Good condition from the photos I can see online. What is your asking price range?" "Market value, but the buyer must be ready to move quickly. The current occupants will need to relocate fast." Regina's expression wavered slightly, probably wondering about the family dynamic, but she kept the focus professional. "What about the current occupants? They'll need time to find new housing." "That is no longer my concern. They are adults. They'll figure it out." The coldness in my own voice surprised me, but it felt appropriate. 8 years of worrying about Robert and Mary's comfort had led to me being tossed out like garbage. Time to prioritize my own interest for a change. We spent an hour going over market conditions, pricing strategies, and showing schedules. Regina was efficient and thorough, treating the sale like any other business transaction. By 4 o'clock, I had signed the listing agreements and arranged for professional photography on Monday morning. "I'll have the property in the listing system by Tuesday," Regina promised. "Given the market conditions and location, I expect serious interest within the first week." Perfect. By the time Robert and Mary realized what was happening, their housing situation would be out of their control. The apartment hunt took less effort than expected. The third complex I visited had a furnished 1-bedroom available immediately. Clean, basic, month-to-month lease for someone in transition. The manager was happy to expedite the application for a cash deposit and the first month's rent. "How long will you be staying?" she asked as she processed my credit check. "Until my other housing situation is resolved. Could be a few weeks. Could be longer." By 6 o'clock, I was moving my essential belongings from the motel to the apartment. Not much to transport. A few boxes of clothes, important papers, Eleanor's jewelry box, and my tools. Everything else could wait in the truck until I decided what came next. The apartment was anonymous and temporary, exactly what I needed. Basic furniture, functional appliances, cable television, and most importantly, a landline phone for coordinating the house sale. I organized my few possessions efficiently, creating a command center to monitor the situation. I called Regina from the apartment phone, confirming the Monday photography session and the Tuesday listing activation. Ms. Morales, I want you to know I'll be traveling next week. The house is to be shown to any qualified buyers, regardless of whether the current occupants cooperate. Understood, Mr. Arthur. As the owner, you have full authority over showing schedules. Legal ownership felt more real every time someone professionally acknowledged it. For 8 years, I had lived as a guest in my own house. Now strangers treated me with the respect that home ownership demanded. I spent the evening organizing my documents and planning the next steps. The house would be listed Tuesday. Showings would begin immediately. Serious buyers usually needed 2 to 3 weeks for financing and inspections. Robert and Mary would likely discover the sale sometime in the first week, depending on how fast news traveled through the neighborhood. By then, I would be unreachable, and the process would be irreversible. I dialed Regina's number one more time before turning in. Ms. Morales, one more thing. I will be out of town for a while, but you have my full authorization to proceed with all aspects of the sale. Accept any reasonable offer that meets our minimum price. I'll keep you updated on all developments, Mr. Arthur. No, don't. I won't be available for updates. That was the beauty of the plan. By the time Robert and Mary realized their comfortable life was disappearing, I would be somewhere they couldn't reach me to beg, threaten, or manipulate. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic. Tomorrow, I would implement the final phase of my strategy. For tonight, I could rest, knowing that justice was finally in motion. 8 years of taking me for granted was about to cost them everything they thought they owned. Sunday morning found me at the city airport with a single carry-on bag and no particular destination in mind. The agent at the ticket counter was helpful when I explained my situation. I'd like to book a flight somewhere warm. I don't care where, as long as I can leave today. She checked availability while I stood there, feeling lighter than I had felt in years. No schedule to keep. No one waiting for me at home. No family obligations to consider. Just an old man with savings in the bank and time to spend as he pleased. There's a flight to Miami leaving in 3 hours. It's expensive for a last-minute booking, but they have seats available. Perfect. Booked. The airport process felt strange after years of staying close to home. Security lines, boarding announcements, the controlled chaos of people traveling to places that mattered to them. I had forgotten how exciting movement could be when you chose it yourself instead of having it thrust upon you. The flight attendant noticed my relaxed demeanor during boarding. "Vacation trip?" she asked as she checked my seat assignment. "Something like that. Haven't been somewhere warm in years. Figured it was time to change that." 3 hours later, I was stepping off a plane into the Florida heat that felt like a blessing after the stubborn spring chill where I came from. Miami International buzzed with tourists and resort representatives, all eager to begin or end their temporary escape from reality. The hotel shuttle driver spoke broken English, but with perfect enthusiasm. "First time in Florida, sir?" "First time anywhere in a long time," I admitted, watching an unfamiliar landscape flash past the windows. The resort turned out to be exactly what someone fleeing family drama needed. Anonymous, comfortable, and completely disconnected from any responsibilities back home. The front desk clerk handled check-in with cheerful efficiency. "How long will you be staying with us, Mr. Arthur?" "Indefinite. I'll let you know when I'm ready to leave." She handed me a key card and a packet of information on resort amenities, pool service, beach access, restaurants, activities for guests who wanted structured entertainment, all available to someone who had just claimed ownership of his own life. My room overlooked the ocean through sliding glass doors that opened onto a private balcony. The sound of waves replaced the memory of suburban silence, and the warm air carried smells of salt and tropical greenery instead of disappointment and betrayal. I stood there for several minutes, letting the contrast wash over me. The first order of business was to turn off my phone. Robert and Mary would eventually realize something was wrong when they couldn't reach me, but by then the house sale would be in motion, and my location would be irrelevant. Let them wonder where I had gone, and why I wasn't available to explain or negotiate. Room service brought lunch to the balcony: fresh fish, cold beer, fruit that actually tasted like it had grown in the sun. Simple pleasures that felt revolutionary after months of eating alone in my room, while my own family treated me like an unwanted guest. The beach was populated by couples and families enjoying vacations they had planned and saved for. I found an empty chair under an umbrella and settled in with a book I had bought at the airport. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be, and nothing to prove to anyone. A waiter approached with the kind of attention money and leisure commanded. "Another beer, sir. Perhaps something from our cocktail menu." "Why not? Bring me something tropical. I'm celebrating." "Celebrating what, if I may ask?" "Freedom," I said, meaning it completely. The afternoon dissolved into a haze of heat, alcohol, and the satisfaction that comes from making decisions without consulting anyone else's opinion. Other resort guests moved through their own vacation rhythms, but I was operating on a completely different timeline. By dusk, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset paint the ocean with colors I had forgotten existed. The contrast with Friday night, sitting among garbage bags on a suburban street, was so complete it felt like someone else's memory. Tomorrow, Regina would start photographing the house for the listing. By Tuesday, Robert and Mary would discover their comfortable arrangement was about to change permanently. They would probably try calling me first, and then spiral into panic when they realized I was unreachable. But I would be here, learning to relax again while they learned how consequences felt. The waves kept coming with rhythmic persistence, washing away what they found and starting fresh with each cycle. Sometimes that's exactly what life required. Complete erasure of what came before, followed by the patience to build something better. I raised my drink to the darkening sky, toasting the end of being grateful for handouts, and the beginning of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Monday morning in Miami arrived with perfect weather and coffee from room service that actually tasted like it had been made this century. I spent the first few hours on my balcony reading a paperback thriller as the waves rolled endlessly over the white sand below. Other resort guests were beginning their vacation routines. Couples heading to breakfast, families organizing beach gear, groups planning excursions, all of them blissfully unaware that hundreds of miles north, a real-life drama was about to unfold. Around 10 o'clock local time, I decided to check my phone. The screen exploded with notifications. 76 missed calls, 43 voicemails, and dozens of text messages. The numbers kept climbing as new calls came in while I scrolled through the chaos. Robert's number appeared most frequently, but Mary had contributed her share of desperation to the digital pile. The first voicemails were confused but demanding, Robert's voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Dad, call me back right away. There are people walking around our house taking pictures. What the hell is going on?" Mary's, sharper and more accusatory. "Arthur, I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to stop this right now. Call us back." But as the hours went on, the tone shifted dramatically. Anger gave way to confusion, confusion to panic, panic to despair. Robert again, hours later. "Dad, please, we can't locate you anywhere. The real estate agent says she's working for you. This can't be legal. Where are you?" Mary, her voice cracking. "Arthur, this is our home. You can't just sell our house out from under us. We've been calling everyone we know." I found Regina Morales's messages scattered among the family chaos. Professional updates delivered with business efficiency that contrasted sharply with the emotional meltdown happening elsewhere. Her text from this morning was particularly satisfying. Mr. Arthur, excellent showing yesterday. A very keen young couple. They mentioned they could close quickly. They love the neighborhood and see themselves raising children there. I'll keep you informed of developments. Perfect. New owners who would actually appreciate the house instead of treating it like a burden they had inherited. The voicemails continued throughout the day, each one more desperate than the last. Robert's voice deteriorated from anger to pleading to something approaching genuine fear. Dad, if you can hear this, we're sorry about how things went. Maybe we can work something out. Please, just call us back so we can talk. Mary tried a different approach, alternating between manipulation and open begging. Arthur, think about what you're doing. We have nowhere to go. Surely you don't want to make us homeless. You're not that cruel. But the most telling message came late in the afternoon. Robert's voice barely holding together. Dad, I keep thinking about that night when you came back from fishing, the way Mary spoke to you, the way I just stood there and let it happen. I know we messed up, but selling the house won't fix anything. Please just call me. Finally, some acknowledgement of consequences. It only took them discovering they weren't actually in control of their own housing situation. I replied to Regina's messages with professional efficiency, authorizing additional showings and confirming my interest in serious offers. But the family calls went unanswered. They had made it clear a month ago that they didn't need me in their lives. Time for them to experience what not being needed actually looked like when the tables were turned. The resort bar served excellent margaritas with fresh lime and salt that tasted like vacation instead of responsibility. I settled into a chair by the pool with my phone silenced, watching families enjoy their temporary paradise, while mine imploded in ways they were only beginning to understand. 8 years of mortgage payments had bought me more than just legal ownership. They had bought me the right to choose who deserved explanations and who deserved silence. Robert and Mary had spent those 8 years teaching me that family loyalty was conditional, that gratitude had expiration dates, and that love could be discarded when it became inconvenient. Well, they had been excellent teachers. Time to show them how well I had learned their lessons. I extended my stay at the resort for another week, informing the front desk that my plans had become more flexible than originally anticipated. The evening stretched ahead with nothing more demanding than deciding whether to order fish or chicken for dinner. Back in the city, the phone calls would continue. The panic would intensify. The reality of their situation would sink in with every unanswered ring. But that was their problem now, not mine. 3 weeks later, I was back in the city with a tan that spoke of extended leisure and a perspective that distance had clarified. The flight from Miami landed on time, and the taxi ride to my downtown apartment felt like visiting a different city. The spring weather had warmed considerably, transforming the landscape from the grey uncertainty I had left behind to something approaching summer optimism. Even the downtown streets seemed more welcoming, though that might have been the effect of no longer feeling trapped by other people's expectations. I was pulling my suitcase out of the taxi trunk when familiar voices shouted my name from across the parking lot. Robert and Mary approached like refugees from their own lives. 3 weeks of searching had left visible marks. Robert looked 10 pounds thinner, his usually neat appearance replaced by wrinkled clothes and sunken eyes. Mary's perfectly maintained image had cracked, revealing someone who had spent too many sleepless nights, facing consequences she had never considered possible. Arthur! Finally! Mary's voice carried relief mixed with desperation. We've been looking for you everywhere. Robert hung back slightly behind his wife, unable to meet my eyes directly. Dad, please, we need to talk. Don't sell the house. We can work something out. I set my suitcase down carefully, noticing how their voices had changed. A month ago, they had spoken to me with dismissive authority. Now they sounded like people begging for something they couldn't afford to lose. Work out what exactly? I kept my voice level. Professional. What is there to discuss? We drove to every friend's house you've ever mentioned, Mary said, the words tumbling out. Your old co-workers, that fishing club, even Eleanor's sister in the next town. Nobody knew where you had been. We were desperate. The word hung between us like smoke. Desperate. A month ago, I had been the desperate one, sitting among garbage bags as they locked me out of my own house. The symmetry was almost poetic. Interesting choice of words, I said. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase. A month ago, I was told I wasn't needed anymore. Remember? Robert finally looked up, his face showing the kind of regret that only comes from watching comfortable assumptions crumble in real time. Dad, we made a mistake. Maybe we spoke too quickly, acted too harshly. Maybe, I said. The word came out sharper than I intended. You threw my belongings in the street like trash. You changed the locks on my own house. You told me to disappear from your lives. And now you're surprised I took your advice. Mary tried a different angle, her voice taking on the manipulative tone I had heard her use with store clerks and service representatives. Arthur, you're hurting us to hurt us. This isn't about justice, it's about revenge. Revenge? I almost laughed. Mary, I am selling my house, that I own, that I paid for, over which you have absolutely no legal claim. How exactly is disposing of my own property revenge? The legal reality hit them like cold water. For 8 years, they had lived as if the house belonged to them, as if my contributions were voluntary charity, rather than an owner maintaining his own property. They had convinced themselves that possession meant ownership, that living somewhere created rights. We talked to lawyers, Robert said quietly. They told us. They explained about the deed, the mortgage papers. Then you understand the situation, I said. I started walking toward the apartment building entrance. You are illegally occupying my house. I am selling it. The new owners will decide if they want tenants. They followed me across the parking lot, their desperation growing more evident with every step. 3 weeks of looking for someone who didn't want to be found had apparently taught them the difference between control and dependence. Dad, we're family. Robert's voice cracked on the last word. I stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Family? A month ago, you stood there while your wife told me I wasn't needed anymore. You watched her cast me out like trash, and you said nothing. You chose her over me, Robert. That was your decision, and you made it. We can pay rent, Mary interjected desperately. Whatever the new owners want, we'll pay it. That's between you and them, I replied, resuming my walk toward the building. I'll give them your number if they're interested in tenants. The apartment building lobby felt like a sanctuary after 3 weeks of ocean views, but for different reasons. This was a temporary refuge, but it was a refuge I had chosen, paid for with my own money, free of the obligations and resentments that had poisoned the house they still thought of as home. They continued talking behind me, their voices blending into a desperate chorus of promises they should have made a month ago. But promises offered under duress weren't worth much. They had shown me their true feelings when they thought I had no power to resist. Now that the power had shifted, their sudden appreciation felt exactly as sincere as it truly was. The elevator doors closed on their continuing pleas, but I could still hear their voices echoing in the lobby as I rode up to the 4th floor. My apartment felt exactly as I had left it, temporary but peaceful, free of the accumulated resentments that had made the house feel like a prison. I unpacked methodically, hanging up vacation clothes that smelled of ocean air and possibility instead of obligation and disappointment. When Robert and Mary knocked on my door 20 minutes later, I was ready for them. "The sale closes tomorrow," I said through the door chain. "You have 1 week to pack your belongings and vacate the property. After that, you'll have to discuss living arrangements with the new owners." "Dad, we're your family." Robert's voice was completely breaking now. "Family?" I pulled the door open further so they could see my face clearly. "A month ago, you threw me out like trash. You told me I wasn't needed. You changed the locks on my own house. Do you remember those exact words, Mary? Take your garbage and leave." Mary attempted one last manipulation. "We can pay rent to the new owners. We have good credit, steady income." "That is no longer my concern," I replied. I started closing the door. They had wanted me out of their lives. "Congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. Please." Robert put his hand against the doorframe. "We'll do anything. We can change." "You had 8 years to change. 8 years to show gratitude instead of entitlement. 8 years to treat me like family instead of a convenient ATM." I stepped away from the door. "The new owners are a young couple with children. They will actually appreciate the house instead of treating it like something they're entitled to." The door closed with a soft click, cutting off their final attempts at negotiation. I spent Tuesday morning at the title company, signing papers that transferred ownership from me to David and Jane Peterson, newlyweds who had fallen in love with the house and planned to raise their family there. They were everything Robert and Mary were not: grateful, enthusiastic, financially responsible, and genuinely excited about home ownership. "Thank you for accepting our offer so quickly," Jane said as we completed the paperwork. "We know other people were interested." "You reminded me why houses exist," I replied. "They are for families who want to build something together, not for people who take blessings for granted." The check for $395,000 felt surprisingly light in my hands. Numbers on paper that represented 40 years of work, 8 years of mortgage payments, and 1 month of learning that family loyalty wasn't always reciprocal, but it also represented freedom. Freedom from ungrateful relatives. Freedom from living situations based on guilt instead of respect. Freedom to choose how I spent my remaining years without considering other people's convenience. Regina Morales handled the final details with professional efficiency. "The new owners take possession Friday morning. I assume the current occupants will be ready to move out." "That is no longer my responsibility," I said, meaning it completely. By Thursday, I had closed out my downtown apartment lease and loaded my truck with everything I actually needed. The rest, furniture, household goods, accumulated items from a life that no longer existed, went to charity. Eleanor would have approved of the simplicity. Friday morning found me driving north, toward the lake region, where lake views and mountain air promised the kind of peace that comes from choosing your own neighbors, instead of being stuck with relatives who confused proximity with loyalty. The radio played classical music as I drove through the changing landscape, every mile putting more distance between me and 8 years of being taken for granted. In my rearview mirror, the city shrank to the perspective of the freeway. Just another town where someone had learned the difference between charity and ownership. Robert and Mary would resolve their housing situation eventually. Maybe the new owners would rent to them. Maybe they would find another place. Either way, they would face their future without the safety net they had spent 8 years assuming would always catch them. Justice didn't require cruelty, only consequences. They had taught me that family was conditional, that gratitude had limits, that love could be discarded when it became inconvenient. I had proven to be an excellent student. The freeway stretched ahead like possibility itself, driving toward a life where appreciation wouldn't be taken for granted, and family would mean something deeper than convenient obligation. Sometimes, the best revenge was simply letting people experience the natural results of their own choices. If you liked this story, please give this video a like. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.